So, why even bother with ESG? I mean, that's a question that's actually been asked, especially in political circles in the Sun Belt in the United States. And certainly at a time when we have a shortage of maybe 7.2 million homes in the United States, as we are trying to accomplish a lot of things with our built environment. It may be tempting to say, gee, maybe this isn't the time for us to focus on sustainability or on governance or on the social welfare of everyone around the building. Maybe we should just focus on making a good investment. And yet, the flow of capital into ESG strategies continues unabated in the United States despite those questions. And I would argue that the reason for that has much more to do with a better risk adjusted return than it has to do with saving the planet. And it appears that a lot of AFIRE members might agree with that argument, given the level of investment that they are making with ESG strategies foremost in their mind.
You are listening to the AFIRE Podcast, real estate, technology, cross-border investing, and the opportunities of a changing world. Let's start a conversation now.
I'm speaking with one such investor here today. He is Patrick Richard, the CEO of Stoneweg US, which is the US-based subsidiary of Stoneweg, a real estate company in Switzerland. They are headquartered in St. Petersburg, Florida, and are making investments across the Sun Belt and the Midwest in the United States into housing, and specifically in workforce housing. So I'm very interested to hear his perspectives on the differences between the two investment territories, if you will, and how he is approaching ESG in the United States. So thank you so much, Patrick, for joining me on the AFIRE podcast.
Thank you, Gunnar. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to you and to your members today. Very much appreciate this opportunity. And as you said, our key investment strategy is not only to provide a safe housing to all the people that need that housing, but also to do it in a sustainable way. And as you said, both goes together.
Mm-hmm.
I think today, ESG, sustainability, responsible investment, you can call it as you want, is just the best business strategy and the best framework for investment that lower your risk and increase your revenue.
So when you look at the differences, certainly there's a much more heavy regulatory framework around ESG in Europe than there is in the US. What are the differences? I mean, is there a difference in terms of how you approach things here versus in Europe?
Of course, there are differences, and it's interesting. A few weeks ago, we were in London participating into different panels and conferences, and effectively, ESG in Europe is not anymore a theme. It is embedded in what you have to do and how you work and how you do your investments, and it is part of your investment strategy. There is the market is there, and you don't have, I would say, a choice, or this is what you do.
Mm-hmm.
Here in the States, it's very different. I think we have much more local and state regulations that we have federal regulation compared to Europe, where you have a strong European framework for ESG investment and responsible investment. And also there is more discussion today still in the US. But those discussions are mostly political discussion. When you speak about money, when you speak about performance, when you speak about returns and the value creation that you can do through sustainability initiatives, I think there is much less discussion, and every investor will agree that everything you can do to improve your returns, everything you can do to create value and to kind of look forward where the market will be in 5-7 years from now, where you protect the asset of your investor, and when you avoid to have stranded asset in your portfolio, everybody agrees that this is the right thing to do.
It just makes sense, in other words. But can you go a little deeper maybe on that in terms of how do some of these practices, as an example, help decrease the amount of risk, increase the return?
So you can talk, for example, about climate resilience. There are a number of things that you can do when you develop properties to improve the climate resilience of your assets, or when you own an asset to reinforce those structures, reinforce the durability of your asset. And that, of course, reduce your risk against any catastrophic weather event.
Mm-hmm.
And you have a direct impact on your NOI if, for example, your insurance company, sensible to what you have done in terms of climate resilience, will give you a lower premium, or if your lender will start looking into what you do in terms of climate resilience and reduce your interest rates because your asset represents a lower risk for the lender.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a direct impact between what you can do in terms of climate resilience, and this is just one example, and your NOI. And if when you speak about NOI, you also speak directly about valuation of your assets.
Mm-hmm.
So not only you protect your asset, but you create value at the same time.
I've also been hearing a lot more from investors that when it comes to the rising premium environments, especially in places like Southern Florida, that having a coherent kind of resiliency in place with the assets themselves can help you in the near term in terms of insurance premium as well. Is that something you've observed?
Absolutely. We have seen, last year was a very tough year in terms of insurance, and we saw premium going up significantly. And when I say significantly, it can be 50, 70, up to 100%. So some investors have seen their insurance premium really to the roof.
Mm-hmm.
This year, the market is a little bit stabilized and there is more capacity, generally speaking. But I remember a few months ago, I was at a conference with different insurance broker, and the question was not about how much the premium would be, but the question is very much more about would there be any insurance for an asset that is not climate resilient,
Mm-hmm.
that is exposed to exposed to water damage, exposed to wind damage, and at a certain amount of time there will probably not be any more insurance. And if you don't have insurance, that means that it's going to be difficult to find a mortgage for your asset. That means that the value of your asset has decreased significantly, if at all. There
Mm-hmm.
is a value left. So this is a definition of a stranded asset. And one thing that ESG does, one thing that sustainability does, is protects the value of your assets.
Protects the value of your assets. I like that. When you are talking about your investment strategies in the US to your European colleagues, um, what is it that they are perhaps most confused about that they need to understand a little bit better about what you're doing here?
So there are a few things that they are confused about. First of all, the organization, as I said, with many more local laws and state laws that are diversified, and you need to find your way among all those different laws. If you go to New York, if you go to Denver, and you go to California, regulations are different, and you need to know what you do.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, there is a certain level of confusion when they listen to the political noise around ESG, and people not focusing on what at the end of the day is important in terms of, we spoke about climate, we spoke about environment, but it is also true for the social element. When you care for your resident, when you have benefit for that, for the investors and for all the stakeholders, when you do a proper governance, it also benefits the investors, and it provides them with the data. So everything that is absolutely common sense in Europe and in this where you have pushback in the US, people are a little bit confused about this. So there is a lot of education, there is a lot of communication, there is a lot of talking about, okay, you hear that noise, but go just below the noise, and you'll see that the US and more and more, so even large investors are vocal about this, but the US in general is sensitive to asset performance and how to create value on the short and long term.
Yeah. Well, I think often that the noise has more to do with people not liking acronyms, having ESG, because when you break it down, do you want to have an asset that is more resilient, that doesn't cost as much money to run? Well, yes. I mean, everyone would agree with that. And do you want to have happy tenants and a neighborhood that supports the success of your building because you're giving back to that neighborhood? Yes, absolutely. Do you want to make sure that the financial reporting and the governance are accurate and transparent? Well, of course I do. And it's very difficult to argue with that, but maybe ESG just sounds kind of wrong.
That's why People will speak about sustainability, people will speak about responsible investment, corporate responsibility, and that's all absolutely fine because we are all talking about the same thing.
Right.
And what we are talking about is, the investment strategy of the 21st century. It is about the current value add, this holistic approach of your assets, and where you create value not anymore only because you renovate units or because you improve the amenities, but you also create value because you take care of your resident, because you work on proper data that you can report to your investors, and all of this. So that's the theme today, is to have this holistic approach, and you call it ESG, sustainability, responsible approach. It is also of the same.
And I've heard a lot of people complain about how sustainability is more difficult in a multi-tenant environment, multi-family environment than it might be, say, in an office environment where you have a lot more control over heating and cooling. You have a lot more control about from centralized systems. So you have garden apartments. You have assets that are difficult, I would think, to approach from a sustainability standpoint. Putting aside social and governance for the moment, how do you approach it?
There is indeed a difficulty and a complexity in collecting data from a multifamily assets compared to collecting the same data from an industrial or a retail or an office asset, where you may have one, two, or three tenants for the whole building. Whereas in a multifamily, you have hundreds of tenants, each of them paying their own electricity bills, and the utility companies in the US do not always communicate the data that they have to the landlord, even in an anonymous manner. So what you have to do is find another way to get access to those data, to those measures, so that you can understand the consumption of electricity, water, gas, where you can understand how waste is managed in your property. And it is a hard work to do, and you need to have processes in place. You can do shadow metering, you can do meter reading. There are different technologies that, the more the time goes, the more those technologies come up. But so there are different things that you can do in order to collect what we call whole building data. And today at Stoneweg, we have about 90% of all the data for all our building, and we have 12,000 apartments. So that's significant. And that's the basis for us to, do our reporting, measure what we do and how we perform. It is our benchmark and our basis.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have this basis, if you don't know what you consume in your different buildings, if you don't know what your tenants are consuming, it's very hard to demonstrate the benefit of your different initiative. It's very hard to demonstrate the savings you do and the additional return that you can have for your investors. So yes, it is complicated. Yes, it is a hard work, but you have to do this hard work to be able to do your work seriously.
I wonder too, in your strategy, you seem to be very much focused on kind of the middle income tenant that we sometimes call it workforce housing or attainable housing. Why there primarily versus, say, more affordable, say, tax advantaged housing or luxury housing? Why the focus there?
For us, the strategy is very much driven by the risk, and for us, this is the best risk-adjusted strategy, investment strategy. We are serving the middle class of America. We are serving, the people, that the first responders, the teachers and nurses, and all those people that are making money, are working and have a salary. So they do not qualify to live in affordable housing, and they cannot afford to live in a luxury product. So we really serve this layer of the population, and we feel that this is for us the best positioning, where even if the economy goes well, then people from lower categories or low income categories can come up and enjoy the middle class housing. And when the economy goes less well, then the people that cannot afford anymore to live in luxury, then they will go down a step and live in what we call a middle class housing solution. And you see those movements all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And especially in the States, where you have people going up and down all the time, we see a lot of movement, and half of our rent roll is turning every year,
Mm.
more or less. So you see those movements, this flexibility, and this is for us the way to fight against vacancy, to have the more occupancy and maximize the rent that we can have in our assets.
Which is just a rational, kind of financially prudent approach. It's not necessarily, again, that you're trying to save the world, but this makes sense from a long-term investment strategy to invest in attainable housing.
Absolutely, and this is also part of the S, if you want, in ESG. It is matching with the need of the society,
Mhm.
and we provide this solution that if the people and our peers were not doing this, there would be a missing part of the housing products in the US.
A lot of times, U.S. Real estate folks tend to have a little bit of an inferiority complex when they go to Europe and they see some things that are happening from a sustainability standpoint, and they think that we're very far behind. And yet, I think a lot of strides have been made, especially in the last 20 years, in terms of making our built environment more sustainable than it was maybe 20 years ago. How would you say we're doing as a market, a real estate market here in the United States?
I think we've made a ton of progress already. I think that people are much more vocal about it and talk about it, and it's a real theme today in the US. I don't think we should be comparing ourselves to Europe. I think there are many ways where we do as well as Europe, or even better than Europe, and there are other ways where Europe is a little bit ahead of us. But it's different markets, it's different building construction, it's different scale, it's different benchmarks. So I wouldn't compare the US with Europe.
Hmm.
We are on our way, and we do as well as we can. The interesting thing is that there is more and more standards, global standards, that will push us to kind of work in similar ways on both sides of the Atlantic, as well as in Asia or in Australia. But again, every country is different, and every country has its own way, but we all work in the same direction.
What do you think people get wrong when it comes to ESG? Where do you think people are most confused that maybe they need to think about it differently?
Recently, there was one of the largest investors in the US that is really committed to ESG, that made a net zero commitment and came out at a press conference and say, "We have this commitment, but we don't know how to get there." And the other thing that they said was, "We have data, a lot of data, but we are not too sure that they are real. It's a lot of estimates from estimates, and we don't trust our data." So I think the one thing that people need to do is to start step by step and put one thing after the other. And there is nothing difficult, there is nothing magical. It's just, as you said at the beginning, a lot of common sense and a lot of hard work, but caring for your asset, caring for your resident, caring for your investors, the stakeholders in general, being just a good corporate citizen, that's what it is.
You put it quite well. That's what it is, being a good corporate citizen, doing the work that's required of us. Nothing magic about it. I really like that. I like the way you're approaching that thought. Is there anything that you think your European colleagues could learn from the US? I mean, is there something we're doing right that maybe Europe needs to come up on?
There is certainly things that we can change, and we do this on a permanent basis, especially in terms of technologies. It's a fascinating time where every day almost you have a new technology, a new sensor, a new approach to your building, to the built environment, and to how to be better at what you do, to monitor better your water consumption, identify leaks, or just not wasting. This dialogue between the US and Europe can bring a lot to each of the party, without speaking about all the artificial intelligence element that we develop in the US, they develop in Europe, and that can also bring a lot of fast track, or a lot of way to better manage our assets and be more efficient in the way we consume utilities in our assets. So yes, dialogue will help a lot.
We've been having a dialogue with Patrick Richard, the CEO of Stoneweg, over the last 20 minutes or so. And unfortunately, we're running out of time, but I do want to thank you for joining us today on the AFIRE Podcast.
Thank you, Gunnar. My great pleasure to talking to you this afternoon.
You have been listening to the AFIRE Podcast. Remember to subscribe on your favorite podcast subscription service, such as Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitchers, and others. AFIRE is not engaged in providing tax, accounting, or legal advice. No content in this podcast is to be construed as a recommendation to buy or sell any asset. Some information included has been obtained from third-party sources considered to be reliable, though AFIRE is not responsible for guaranteeing the accuracy of third-party information. The opinions expressed are those of its respective contributors and sources, and do not necessarily reflect those of AFIRE.